Logan, it's really wonderful to have you on Pioneer Park today. You and I know each other from way back, but you've been a founder and CEO of the Founder Readiness Institute, and I'm super excited. I just got my own Founder Readiness report. I think it was yesterday. I read through it, and I'm excited to talk about it, learn about your pathway to jumping into the founder's seat, and specifically, I think jumping into the founder's seat to help founders out, I think is really interesting.
Yeah, thanks so much. It's great to be here, Brian. The Institute itself is the parent company of the Founder Readiness Level. So the Founder Readiness Level is the product, our first product that we launched. And the Institute is really designed to help founders and investors make better decisions and help support founders on their growth journey. And so we provide assessment capabilities for both ends of the spectrum, so the founders and the investors, to better understand the leadership capacity and readiness of a founder or founding team to actually lead a startup company.
And I guess what caused you to focus on, the startup journey in particular, as opposed to many other kinds of challenges that people face in life?
Yeah, absolutely. So I really wanted to help empower more people who were innovating. So I'm a systems thinker by nature. I really enjoy seeing impactful systems evolve and change and have more impacts on positive impacts on society and nature. And so as I was moving along in my career, I just noticed that we were asking people of this huge ask to start a company, which is going from 0 to 1 or 1 on is a big journey, and it requires a lot of different skills and capabilities. And we arm founders we give them money, we give them some support, but there's not a lot of focus on the actual person and their psychology, their specific conditions. And so I really wanted to help empower founders and investors who were investing in those founders so that we could have better outcomes with in innovation, essentially.
You're using the word we from the perspective of the person who's sort of arming the founders. I'm curious what in your own work history kind of exposed you to sitting on that side as the investor, as the evaluator.
Yeah, absolutely. So I spent the majority of my career in the investing world. I've played a number of different roles, mostly in private equity, mostly in real assets. So that means like I was investing in things like forestry and agriculture related investments. And so I've always had a keen interest in innovative business models, innovative funding, innovative financing mechanisms in order to deploy capital to support regenerative and impactful outcomes in nature. And so I've been kind of in that mode of thinking about how do we improve business? How do we widen the aperture of profit only and incorporate stakeholders and incorporate nature and negative externalities that tend to occur in our economy. So, along my journey, I just noticed that, especially in early stage investing, we talk a lot about how important the team is, but there's not actually support in many ways for the actual people behind the company, essentially. So, we're just like, we evaluate all these things, their product, the product market fit, their go-to-market strategy, their financials, but we don't actually ask them questions about, how do they handle complexity? How do they pivot when things are rough? How resilient are they as a person when they receive, when the market gets tough? How do they respond as a human? And so I think some of these questions are asked, but not in a very standardized way. And certainly not in a sort of programmatic way where you may find some red flags or some things that concern you and then actually provide that follow-on coaching support. Like that's just not done very often. And so I got really excited about a set of tools that could really enable that, progress that in our society.
Is it fair to call this a form of psychometrics, or do you think of it differently?
I just like to think of it as providing additional layers of insight and developmental tools and like a common language. It certainly draws from behavioral research and psychometrics to create the tool, but it's not really the way that I like to talk about it, because I think fundamentally what we're talking about is just having a better way to evaluate people's readiness to do this task of leading a company. When you use those terms, people get lost in the weeds of it.
Interesting. I've recently run across a fair amount of content produced about what hiring is like right now, or finding those teams is like right now, from either from the venture capital perspective or from the early team attempting to find their kind of early engineering contributors, where they're sort of filtering for autism and certain types of being neurodivergent. And I think maybe the contention or the underlying thesis there, or the thing that's being kind of drawn attention to, is it's often really zany personalities who are selected for to go on the difficult journey of doing venture-backed companies. I guess, how do you embed that zaniness in the way that you understand in designing something like this sort of survey?
Yeah, I mean, I think you do have to have a certain zaniness to want to start a company or to lead a company. And I think that that's all fine and good. And we should be, exploring some of those qualities in people. Like, I think there's a certain dimension of, are you, for lack of a better word, crazy enough to do this thing? But why not also have some of these other components evaluated? Things like personal resilience or coachability. Like, for instance, if even the most brilliant person in the world, if they're not asking for any feedback on their own behaviors or challenging their own ways of thinking, then how likely are they to listen to the market and to do good customer discovery? So I just think these things like coachability are sort of fundamental to being successful. And you can maybe have some successes without being coachable, but you're going to hit a wall at some point. And what we're trying to measure is someone's ability to lead over time and lead with scale. So lead with complexity. As the company evolves, can they evolve with it? And so, yes, people are going to play different roles. Who starts the company might not be who grows the company, but we still can look for these qualities, these constructs in people that probably will lead to better outcomes if you have them.
There's a clip that I've run across, I think it's from an interview with Mark Andreessen, who's talking about the sort of psychological profile, as he understands it, of the people that go on to found big companies. And it's always this outcome. I mean, I'm going to poke at this a little bit. It's always this outcome of found big companies that is sort of examined as the sort of proof point. And the statistician in me is always a little bit skeptical of how much of this is sort of survivorship bias. Are we getting sort of an even sampling? There's a bunch of different complex criteria, but nonetheless, I think it's interesting. I think his core thesis was that it is really rare personality types, like people that are very high in intelligence, because you need that to achieve difficult things, and to, accurately perceive and kind of make good decisions. And one of the other traits was that you're very disagreeable, that you're willing to basically go against the crowd and not kind of like abide. And so it's very interesting to think about coachability on this particular vector, like how receptive to coaching, how receptive is the ideal person who's starting something? Should it be, extremely receptive? Should it be extremely sort of zeroed in on what they're doing? Do you currently have a thesis on that?
I do. That's a great point. And it's something I think about a lot, because you don't want someone to be a doormat. You don't want someone to say, oh yeah, whatever you say, yeah, I'm happy to incorporate it. I think you want someone to thoughtfully reflect without getting defensive. I think that's the core thing. You're trying to sort out people who are super defensive, because I think defensiveness is something that really blocks a lot of information from coming in. And so you want someone to be strategic with the insights that they're utilizing and applying to the company.
Yeah.
I mean, that's something that it comes up a lot. And I'm glad you asked it, because it's sort of this, like anything else, it's balance.
Mm-hmm. What problem do you see this solving as a business? Other than being just sort of a resource in the world that you can kind of release, how do you think this sort of fits into the current ecosystem?
I like to start with the statistics that I've come across and work from there, because they're so powerful. McKinsey research and Harvard Business Review show that 2/3 of companies are failing as a result of internal dynamics. And that's things like the founder burning out, founder team dynamics, and conflict. I mean, that to me is really powerful. These are some pretty heavy hitting institutions coming out and saying, it's really some of the what we call soft skills that may be leading to more companies failing than is optimal. And I say optimal because some ideas are bad. There's market issues. The product sucks. We're going to expect some companies to fail, but to have 2/3 related to the people component, it seems like we're really missing out on a lot of potential innovation and good ideas coming to fruition, because of the internal conflicts, and both the internal conflict of the person with themselves, but also with the teams. So I feel like we can do better. I feel like we can improve those outcomes. And I've talked to many VCs at this point, And one VC anecdotally recently told me that 83% of their previous funds companies failed as a result of the people and the internal dynamics. So some VCs are experiencing even higher rates. And again, that's one, but I've heard so many people cite that this is an issue. And when I push them for solutions, like, well, what do you do about that? They don't really have a good answer. And the current status quo is investors doing a gut check on people. That's valid. Certainly, we should all have our own read on people that we're going to invest in, and then reference checks and warm intros. But clearly, that's not sufficient. Like, I think we're just lacking better rigor and standardization of how we can evaluate people.
Have you been on the front lines for any of these people failures? And do you have any stories from the trenches?
It's a good question. Yes. I mean, part of what informed this idea was my own angel investing. And I made a couple calls, I think based on charisma, that I was really persuaded by charismatic personalities that had a great vision and could articulate that really well. But when push came to shove, in these cases were just not very good at responsiveness and purposeful. I would call it purposeful agility. Like one of our constructs is called purposeful agility. And it's like, how good are you at making strategic moves and taking in information and then pivoting towards those outcomes that you need to pivot towards? And so I just didn't ask enough clarifying questions about their behavioral tendencies or other experiences they've had in the past. Like, I just didn't do enough diligence on the people. And so, yeah, I've lost quite a bit of money at this point.
What I'm curious when you say something about somebody's questions about their behavioral tendencies, and the propensity for somebody to be able to game the test and sort of understand what's being asked for and sort of show up, because so much of raising money is a dog and pony show where founders certainly know, experienced founders certainly know that they're going to be poked and prodded like a racehorse, and they have to be looked in the mouth, have nice teeth, and all that sort of stuff.
That's a good way to put it.
And
prodded like a racehorse. I haven't heard that one, but it's a good one.
And I'm curious, during that experience, I think people are definitely not sort of leaning into their most authentic and vulnerable selves. Like obviously there's a level of authenticity. I think if you're doing something crazy and you're really shooting for the moon, you have to have a level of authentic, joie de vie behind it. You have to have some sort of energy, a will to power, a will to realize that. And I think that comes through. But certainly some of the softer aspects, coachability plays well with others, like playground-like behavior that we've probably, if you were observing this person from their childhood onward, you'd have a good read. That's the sort of stuff that people aren't necessarily sharing in this really transparent way during this process. So what do you think what about your process allows to have insight into those traits?
I think that's a really, really important and valid question. So it's ever evolving. I think I will say that what we currently have is people kind of doing these gut checks and reference checks, which provides some insight. And then our tool provides an additional layer of insight that's a bit more systematized. It's a more rigorous. So we're kind of layering on information as it becomes available. In terms of someone's ability to game the system, I feel that our tool is one of the least gamifiable of the leadership assessments out there, because it's a one-way video interview. And we're asking open-ended scenario questions for about 45 to 60 minutes. And you'd be surprised what you can tell from someone speaking about themselves for that amount of time. So we take that transcript and we score it based on a rubric, and we cite evidence for why we chose certain levels. And so, it's a human scoring. So right now there's multiple human scoring, and then eventually there will be some AI scoring as well. So that will sort of add a layer of rigor and reduction of bias in that way too. You can train AI to do things like don't score someone higher for verbosity. Like just because they talk more doesn't mean that they should get higher score, et cetera. So I think that there's always going to be people who are very charismatic and know what to say in certain scenarios. But in this case, it's a bit more off-putting and harder to game because you might know some of the questions ahead of time, but most people don't. And they're just getting on and they're just having to talk in an open-ended way. And so you can just really start to sense patterns in someone's way of thinking and how they construct narratives. And they were really good at telling whether people just say keywords versus like back it up with stories and examples and evidence-based responses. So I think those are some of the ways. The current leadership assessments, many of them are forced choice or your sentence completions. And those you can literally put in a ChatGPT and just say, what do I answer to get these outcomes? And so I go back to, it's a combination of we're doing the best we can with the tools we have. Ours is the most rigorous we've seen, and it's only getting better with some AI training. And then at the end of the day, our best alternative right now is literally people's, largely to some degree, biased opinions on an individual. So that's kind of how I think about it at this juncture.
Yeah. You talked about this notion of constructs, and I think I've heard you use that word before. So how is your examination or profiling broken down?
Yeah. So we selected based on hundreds of research articles on adult developmental theory, what's called vertical development. It's this developmental process of like that people go through as they evolve as people over time. We took that research combined with a bunch of behavioral research and selected these 6 constructs that we use in our assessment tool. And so they are strategic complexity. How good is someone at evolving with complexity, like taking in a ton of different data points and making good decisions from that, holding paradoxical thought, like not making a judgment one way or the other, but being able to hold paradoxical thoughts, and then complexity combined with that. Resilience under fire is the second one. Does someone bounce back quickly from pressure, failure, or stress? So if they've got a lot of, pressure mounting, do they capitulate under that? Or are they able to like transmute it and thrive? The third one is team climate IQ. How good are they at building a work culture that actually is in a flow state where people feel motivated, where they're doing their best work, etc. Number 4 is coachability, which we talked about. Are they able to take hard feedback and then strategically do something with it? Number 5 is purposeful agility. So this is about pivoting fast when needed. So how anchored are they to an idea of something versus what needs to happen? And then are they staying anchored to their mission and values along the way? Like, are they kind of orienting that North Star and being like, well, this is our mission and vision and values, but I can move within that and pivot when I need to. And then the last is relational and emotional IQ. So this is about building trust and rapport. This is basically relational intelligence, like emotional ability to read people, ability to self-reflect. And, these are all important for different reasons. At the end of the day, you want to be able to attract people. You want to retain them. You want to be able to pivot when you need to. You need to take in feedback, do something useful with it. And you need to be able to hold complexity as your company evolves. So those are kind of reasons why we measure these constructs.
Any like one in particular that you could kind of dive a little bit deeper into and like tell us like what is the motivation for it? Whenever I think about psychological analysis, be that, Myers-Briggs, Enneagram, astrology, or Big Five, I always think about the underlying kind of motivation. Is that motivation kind of sound? Big Five is legendarily created from statistics, but I also find Big Five is one of the least popular in terms of the way people share it, probably because it doesn't have a bunch of story to it. It's really just statistics, where you sit in relative to everybody else. And I'm not sure if there's like a deeply motivated first principles thinking about the organization of identity or self or anything like that, although maybe there are. But I'm curious, like with these particular principles, these sort of 6 constructs, what is the kind of underlying motivation for these particular 6, and how are they parsed one versus the other?
The constructs were selected based on converging evidence from like meta-analyses and longitudinal studies linking the constructs to measurable outcomes in leadership effectiveness, like adaptability and team functioning. They're in different settings, not just startup settings, but they show correlations with positive outcomes. So there's like a fundamental research basis here. And then we picked the ones that we felt were most related to like a startup context. So things like needing to pivot quickly. For instance, like the resilience under fire construct is rooted in this concept of like psychological capital and stress appraisal theory. So that correlates emotional regulation and recovery recovery orientation with sustained performance. I have too many stressors. It's like an input output thing. It's like if you have too many stressors coming in and they just build up internally and you don't have a way to process them or organize them effectively inside yourself, then you're going to burn out. Like you're more likely going to burn out, or you're going to kind of hit a wall or not be able to leverage your energy most effectively. It's kind of like things getting stuck in a system. So if you have too many people stressing you out, or, your investor calls and they're mad, and then your product, something fails in your product. And it's just like, you can't organize yourself and like transmute that information and put it in its place. Then you're going to start glitching and not have a sustained performance level. And then as your company grows, there's going to be more and more stressors. So learning how you yourself build that framework internally and how you place those stressors or deal with them, things like breath work or meditation or going on a walk, talking to, trusted advisors. You have to have systems in place for yourself to be able to handle all of that stress. And a lot of people don't. And that's the kind of thing we find out by asking them. So how do you manage stress? And a lot of people say, oh, I take a breath or two, but there's many, many layers to that if you just say breath work, that we're going to give you probably a lower score, because you're not building on that. You're not showing us examples. You're not pointing to specific instances where you had a bunch of stress and you dealt with it in a very sophisticated way.
So beer on the couch is not a good answer for that particular.
A beer on the couch probably isn't going to get you a good rating.
I'm curious, in your own failed investments as an angel investor, are there moments of these companies or of these teams where you most wish you could have been a fly on the wall to sort of understand beyond the kind of like initial messaging, beyond the charisma, how these people built teams and whether this company was like real and had a shot? Basically, moments that you think are kind of most revealing of these kinds of propensity to fail or succeed.
There's two main things that, upon reflection and, continued evolution of my own thinking, that stand out to me. And one is, how much customer discovery have you had, and how have you mapped those customer responses and done something with that information? Like, I think without this assessment, that is something I would really delve into, is like, how many customers have you actually talked to, and what have they said, and how do you process that information in a meaningful way to continue evolving your product? And the other is like asking more questions about how the team meets and what the outcomes of those meetings are and how they're structuring their own decision-making process. And then I pay attention to whether someone responds quickly. I think that if you invested in someone and they're not responding or giving you information that you need, that's a really big red flag. So there's I guess 3 ways that now I am a lot more diligent about how
Attuned to. Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, I think there's an interview with Sam Altman where he notices, I don't think as necessarily a criticism, but an observation, that time to response is one of the major things that he observes as being correlated with positive outcomes. Not that that's good messages for a work-life balance, but I also I think that founding things and really sitting at the helm is hard for work-life balance. There's no way.
Yeah, I think it's part of what you're signing up for when you decide to run a company.
And that's a journey that you've signed up for now with this process. And so how have you found your own founder readiness?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I'm still waiting for my scores, by the way. Benji is working on mine, but I did take the assessment. I'm happy to share my results. For transparency, I think that's really important, by the way. I endeavor to be someone who's like always willing to share how they are evolving. I endeavor to be someone who's always working towards my best version of myself and my best version of leadership. And I'm happy to share the ways that I do those things, and open to feedback, obviously, but only strategic feedback. But I mean, I found it. This is my second company. So my first company was a sell-side advisory firm. So we helped mostly food and agriculture businesses and like companies and funds raise capital. And so it was a very different business. This is my first time launching like a product. So yeah, it's been an amazing journey. So much to do. I would say there's just so many, especially like the tech stack piece has been mind-blowingly complicated in many ways. But yeah, I think it's not for the faint of heart. I think running a company is certainly, people talk about how complicated and intense it is. It really is.
Speaking of like the way becoming overwhelmed by stimuli and having a way of processing that stimuli, what are your own practices around that?
Yeah, I have had a spiritual meditation ritual practice for many years now. And so I started this work. I started in Zen Buddhism when I was in my early 20s, and I've migrated over to a number of other approaches. But I think it's so foundationally important to have something to be able to center and ground yourself and then clear your mind, and focus and visualize certain things. So I kind of use a combination of those things depending on the need: visualization, clearing my mind, breath work, centering. And so that's looked like qigong, that's looked like sitting meditation, walking meditation, hypnotherapy. So I really employ a lot of different tools, but I think it's just so important to have something that you can go back to get out of the monkey mind.
One of the, I guess, critiques I've heard of the kind of like, shall we call this sort of the wellness orientation or the sort of self-actualization industry is that it's very oriented towards male pursuits and sort of male identity. And, for instance, like the solo ayahuasca retreat, the ice baths, the like manly men boot camp where you get, sprayed with cold water on the beach. In the founder's journey, it has been predominantly male for a long time. And so probably a lot of the kind of tropes about what it means to be successful are rooted in sort of, masculine norms. And I'm curious, have you found yourself as a female founder becoming more attuned to different paradigms, to different sort of symbols? Like, how do you think it's different?
I think there's a recognition that physiologically, hormonally, men and women are biologically different. And the ways in which we have developed work culture has been more male dominated. And I think women, or myself, I'll just speak for myself, I have found that I've tried some of those ways of being, and sometimes it works for me. I think I have to tailor it to realize that I don't have as much testosterone and sort of like masculine energy as men tend to have. And so I can do a bit of that. Like, I think pushing yourself and doing an ice bath or, more like intense physical wellness practices can be a good thing. But I found that naturally and then consciously over time, I have chosen to do things that are a bit more restorative and that play more to my physiology and my hormonal situation. And so I think it's a combination of talking to other women, trying things out for myself that did or did not work, and also just contrasting and seeing like how certain men are thriving and like it didn't work for me. Just sort of like
Totally
playing around, and also just being honest about like yourself and how you're comprised.
Yeah, I know a lot of men that don't like really, really intense physical exercise, and like that's just not how they operate all the time. And for me, it's like, oh no, I couldn't live life without that. That's such a sort of a cornerstone of how I stop the monkey mind. Recognizing that just differs so much from person to person within the same sex, let alone between sexes. I think
it does.
everyone's, yeah. Everyone finds
your
their
own flavor. Yeah, you have to find your own path.
Find your own flavor. Yeah.
I mean, it's just like start somewhere and then like see it as a spectrum. Like back off or go forward with something as it works for you. I mean, that would be. I mean, it sounds like generic advice, but I do think that I've seen women, and myself included, who have tried to act, in a more intense masculine fashion in a corporate setting, and I think there's more of a tendency to burn out for women and acting like that, or kind of like trying to keep that up. That's my honest opinion.
I'm curious, back to the question of your own kind of like journey and your own growth, and in the spirit of vulnerability, which I think you've kind of you've been sharing here. What do you think are the elements of your own leadership, of your own founder's journey, that need the most improvement? What are the parts that you're sort of focusing on in your next chapter to kind of like further sharpen, harness, etc.?
I've always been on this really interesting balance point of like, how much technical skill do I build versus how much do I learn to orchestrate other people doing work in a technical capacity? And so for this, for the Founder Readiness Institute and building the product, there's been some work that we've been doing with automation, with AI and large language models and training. And so I've had to get to the point where I'm fluent enough to speak about the concepts that we're working with, so I can talk to the dev team if needed, but realizing that my role is the CEO and I have to do a lot of different things. And so just like pulling back, and I think I have more wisdom as an individual, just having worked for 20 years. And I've kind of seen myself dig into the weeds too much or not dig in enough. And so I kind of have a good sense now of like, I need to pull back. This is too much. I'm spending too much time here when other people are experts. And I think relinquishing the need to feel like an expert has been a really big growth edge for me. And then also, this combination of like, the world is so digital and so fast, and information is king now. And it's like, especially with AI, you have so much access. But how do you process that information and like leverage these tools like anything else for the betterment of what you're working on without getting overwhelmed? So I think a lot of what I've been working on is just, how do I become someone who's fluent and can use AI, but not overuse it and not get overwhelmed by it? And so, this is a little bit a function of when I came into the fold professionally, but in some ways I'm glad I didn't grow up with these AI tools, because it enabled me to learn to think really critically on my own without a lot of these tools. I think if I were just diving in now, it might be more difficult to figure out where they sit in the system I'm working in. And then, I guess on a more like personal level, I am finding a growth edge around sales. I think I enjoy talking to people. I enjoy being out there and sharing more about the product. But in terms of like talking to people about actually purchasing and like closing deals, and I think that's something that is a growth edge for me as well, to be totally honest.
Well, this has been a lovely conversation with you, Logan. It's been really wonderful. Is there anything else you want me to kind of like ping on before we kind of close things out?
We're continuing to build this data set of founders. Like, that's one of the things I'm really excited about, is being able to show more correlations with positive or negative outcomes based on these constructs. And so we're excited to be teaming up with academic institutions and accelerators and other groups to really build this kind of core data set of founders, and hopefully leverage that in a positive way so that we can start to see industry specific or stage specific patterns that will really serve the community and the market overall, and help direct people to figure out where they fit. I think a lot of people think they want to be a CEO or a founder, and they don't necessarily have the skill set, or eventually they realize they don't really want to do it, and they might sit somewhere else in a team more effectively, or someone wants to start a company and they can't find the right teammate. Like, we want to help with solving these problems with founder matching, with helping people really realize where they sit in the system as well. So I'm really excited about the bigger picture of what we're building. It's not just helping investors make a better decision with their specific portfolio. It's like, this is a system that we're helping evolve, where we're really focusing more on the people starting companies and leading companies. And so I'm just really excited to be part of that movement, and look forward to working with folks who are on the same page with that.
And aspiring founders, or those who are interested in sort of understanding more about your assessment, where can they find out more about you?
So we are at www.founderready.io.
All right. And are you actively recruiting new people to sort of get involved with the survey? If founders, regardless of whether they're venture backed or not?
We have a founder facing product that's called the Founder Readiness Compass that we just released. And this is really designed for founders to be able to go on our website and just take the assessment and get their dashboard results in 5 to 7 days. So if you have any more interest in that, it's on our website, or please reach out to us. I can be reached at logan@founderrl.com. And we can also reach out to FAQ@founderrl.com as well.
Lovely. Well, this is great, Logan. I look forward to following your journey, both as an individual and the Founder Readiness Institute as a company.